God's high priest. So he was held to a different standard. Like Moses, you couldn't just randomly do whatever you wanted when everybody's watching you and you are operating in God's position. You had to do what you're told. So Moses wasn't allowed in the land, and Eli was warned. He was warned plenty of times that he had to reform, he had to act, but he didn't. And how were we introduced to Eli? He was sitting on a chair. The priests were the busiest people in the world. Jesus said, the priests are the ones that are allowed to break the Sabbath. They're actually busiest on the Sabbath day because everyone's offering their offerings and thinking about God. This guy is sitting on a chair, overweight. And then there's a classic thing where Samuel heard of God to listen intently. And of course there's this passage in Samuel 2 where it says the lamp of God goes out. Eli's eyes were dim. They could not see, no open vision. All sight, sight, sight. And God spoke. And he was heard of this child. And so Eli perceives that God was calling the boy. What did that tell him? Well, who was the person that God spoke to? It's normally the high priest. And so he now realized that I've been sacked by God. I've been fired. God is now talking to a child. There is more potential for good in that boy than me. God has fired me. And he would have known in that instant, I've now been bypassed. And God is dealing exclusively. My role has been made redundant by Almighty God. And what does he say? It's Yahweh. Let him do whatever it seems good. So he doesn't fight it. He knows he deserves this. And this is the tragedy of the man. Like he is so weak and broken that he can't lift himself up. And look, I think he would have tried again with Samuel. He would have done his best with him. He was a man looking for a second chance. But the damage was being done. And he could have used the law to stop his boys. He could have had the boys stoned. Right? But he didn't. And so he paid the price. And what is it? When we last see Eli, he's sitting on his chair. Right? And he falls over backwards, and because he's so fat, his neck breaks. So there's a lesson for all of us who get a little bit fat. You know, that's what happens. And again, we're reminded that in human beings, even in the very worst people, there is something there that can be appealed to. There might be an animal in all of us, and we know that, right? And again, we discipline the animal. We have to. We can't be people that don't discipline our children. But I would put to you that all of these examples show that our default approach should be looking for potential, looking for good, looking for the spark of God in that child and developing it, working it and encouraging it. Okay? So what do we learn? Well, good and bad fathers both failed. Good and bad fathers made bad decisions. Good and bad fathers sinned against God. There is no exceptions. Right? They all sinned. They all made pretty epic mistakes. They all did very embarrassing things. You've only got to look at Jacob. An absolute disaster, swimming around, pulled and conflicted in all these different directions. They showed poor judgment. You know, take on your handmaid, why not? Me in a pot plant? Sure. You know, they weren't making intelligent, principled, godly decisions. And good and bad fathers allowed their human nature to take over. What's the difference, though, between the good and the bad and the ugly? Well, good fathers want to be good fathers, and they put the needs of others first. Good fathers seek positive father role models. You know, David is my father. All those kings that sacked their fathers, and they took on David as a role model, and they read the Proverbs that are inspired by David when he reformed his life and he became a good dad. Good fathers aspire to be men of God, their father. And again, we don't always do it. You know, there's dark periods in our lives. We have bad days and bad weeks, and sometimes we have bad months and years. Right? But at the end of the day, there is this aspiration to be better that gets us and drags us off our feet. And isn't it true, isn't it, that baptism teaches us that we don't just put to death human nature in baptism and live in a new way of life. It's an archetype for the rest of our lives. So all growth comes from you put to death something that's holding you back so that you can bring to life something that's going to make you grow. And so when we get in these ruts, there is no other way to get out of a rut than to kill it. right? Now, I had a doctor that said to me very recently, you are morbidly obese. Morbid. That hurt particularly. She was, we're going to put you on blood pressure medication and you're pre-diabetic. Now, my goodness, I mean, I felt like I was 12 rounds in a boxing ring. I came out of there and I was like, There's no other way to change habits that get you in that situation that you've got to kill the old way of life and do something, and it's not easy. The death of anything is hard, right? But we have to do it, especially when you have children. So nobody wants to sit down and have awkward conversations with your children. But you know what? You brought them into the world. That's your job. You kind of have to do that. You signed up for it, okay? Good fathers are willing to be honest, self-aware and corrected. Good fathers, and this is the defining thing, if we take nothing else away, they fall down but they keep getting up. And we're reminded of Proverbs, a just man falls 7 times but he gets up again. Is he just because he never falls? Can he still be just even though he does fall? Absolutely. What makes a man just? The thing that makes him just is he keeps getting up. And that, if you will learn nothing from these fathers, learn that when you fall down, keep getting up. And God will be there. God will be looking after us. But the difference between good and bad is struggling fathers are self-absorbed and they cannot meet needs. Struggling fathers remain victims of the past and they keep seeking self-reinforcement all the time. It's about them first and everybody else second. Struggling fathers do not develop a strong enough faith or conscience that allows them to put to death their pride, their ego, their habits and things like that. Struggling fathers are very easily self-deceived and they resist correction, you know. Wives, children, friends try to talk to them, like Elijah, John the Baptist. And there's all that pride, that barrier that says, no, I don't want to do that. Struggling fathers wallow in self-pity, regret, and excuses. And that really is the difference. And I think if we're all honest, we've been there, but we have to grow beyond there. And this is, again, baptism principles. Certain things have to die so that other things can come to life. And so when we looked at these fathers, we looked at everyone would have highs and lows, but they all struggled to meet the needs of their children. And so you see that in Isaac and Rebekah. He related to one child, but not the other. You see it in Adam and Eve. You know, one child is fine, the other isn't. You see it all through the Bible. You know, that principle that says the elder shall serve the younger. And again, it's a principle you see. I had this horrible thought one day that maybe the younger's slightly better than the elder because we cut our teeth on the elder, but we actually become better parents as we go down. And I'm an overthinker at the best of times, so I remember that. I was looking at my elders and going, what have I done to you? Because it's true, you get better at it, don't we? We just get better at being parents, right? So, but again, it's hard, it's not easy. And it's something that you've got to actually try to do. You brought them into the world and you're the adult. You're the one that has to do that. They all experience challenges in their marriage. I've been married for 23 years. As I said, there was a period of time where for 2 years, I had a breakdown. Neola had cancer, and we were effectively flatmates. We agreed to a new normal. Neola and I handled tragedy very differently. So we just sort of stayed out of each other's way, right? But we're going to experience it. Marriages go like that all the time. Peter says, when you marry your wives, you live with them according to knowledge. You think that's a strange thing to say about the love of your life. But I think if you've been married long enough, you know that sometimes we do things because we know they're the right thing to do, not that we necessarily feel like doing it. And that's where knowledge has to be. You're not going to feel like it all the time, but you do it because it's right. You do it because you're a husband, you're a father, you embrace that role, and that's what men do, even if you don't feel like it. They all struggle with avoidance and shutdown. And again, it's a male trait. I think any male that's been on the planet long enough has had that, where you're just like, I've had enough, I'm done here, I'm backing away. And in some respects, that's not a bad thing. You know, time in the wilderness I feel is actually a very valuable thing. There's been periods of my life where I've backed away from everything and I have just had time alone. God did it to Paul. Paul's raring to go. He's converted. Right, let's get in there. Let's try and make things right. He spent 3 years in the desert. John the Baptist in the desert. Christ, 30 years before he started his ministry. Moses, 40 years in the desert. Right? So time in the wilderness is very, very important. So if you shut down, and we're shutting down too much, sometimes it's probably a good time to just back away and start reflecting on things. Every dad had highs and lows, and they all struggled to meet. That's exactly what I said before, didn't I? I've just repeated my slide. Sorry about that. Okay. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to confront our dark side, don't we? We need to face the demons. We need to chain the animal that's in all of us. And if we can do that and confront it in ourselves, well, when we see it in our children, we're going to be able to help them do the same thing as well. And so we get stories like Samson and David and Solomon, and it's very exposed, it's very raw, it's very uncensored. And we see the kings like David and Solomon, and we realise that these people had the power to indulge their lust, to indulge their desires. And so what do we find? We find, well, God's actually quite pragmatic. And God suffered them. He suffered them to have their concubines. Now, when you think about it, brethren, and with the kids, I went through Ecclesiastes 2 and I said, look at all the list of things Solomon could do as king. Men singers, women singers, entertainment, comedy. How many things can you do now, but so much more? And of course, there's a lot of things where we can line up entertainment, comedy, music, food, way more than Solomon ever could. We have more power than Solomon to indulge our lusts. And surprise, surprise, we still find life futile. So check, right? We agree with Solomon. But one thing we can do is concubines. You know, the internet gives us an endless array of those sorts of things. And so we also have the power of king. We don't have to go on the rooftop and at the time of prayer and peak in order to feel temptation, right? We carry it around in our pockets. And so brothers and sisters, I think if we're all honest, like David, like Solomon, like all these kings, this is going to be an area we struggle with. And we often judge Lot because he made all these daft decisions, lost half his family. But at the end of the day, he did try, and he didn't like it. And it was weakness that made him make those decisions. But at the same time, he tried to maintain his integrity. And so we have to be honest about the situation we're in. We are surrounded by more temptation and more power to do wrong and more ideologies that conflict with God's word than any other generation. We're going to fall down. It's going to be a struggle. And when your children are young and when they hit that point where they're now becoming a lot more aware, we actually have to be there alongside them. And it can't just be the one conversation where we explain the birds and the bees and we're all done here. It has to be an ongoing conversation. It has to be something where we're walking together. And so with these people, the kings, in breaking God's commandment, they forfeited any chance they had of a good marriage. Right? And Solomon's got this classic quote in Ecclesiastes when he's weighing everything out. He says, all these things I put together to see what answer I could find. He said, 1 man in 1,000 I found, but I didn't find one good woman in 1,000. He said, well, he had 1,000 wives. He had one woman every day for 3 years. But see, what woman is going to give herself to you when you're going to be with Mary Lou one night and then Jane the next, and off you go for the next 3 years? You're not going to have a good marriage. Abraham compromised, listened to his wife, should have stood up and been a man, but he didn't. And suddenly he had problems. And of course, we look at Jacob, he had problems as well. So God may suffer you because of your weakness, right? But at the end of the day, they forfeited any chance they had at a good marriage. But the reassuring thing is, brothers and sisters, is that God is aware, God is pragmatic. And so when we deal with moral failure, there's a number of passages which I find deeply comforting. Psalm 103 is probably my personal favourite. God is a father. He made us. He knows us. He knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. God actually made us this way. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life are nothing more than animal instincts. They are things that we need to stay alive. And when you look at Genesis 3 verse 6, and it says the woman saw the food and it was good for food and something to be desired to make one wise and pleasant to the eyes, she took. But when you change the word fruit for banana, suddenly there is nothing wrong with a thought process that looks at banana and goes, yeah, that looks good. That's healthy. It's pleasant. Or looking at ingredients and going, no bad ingredients in there. That'll make us wise. That'll develop the brain. There's nothing wrong with the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life as far as keeping ourselves alive. If we didn't exercise those things, we would end up buying mouldy, bad food that wasn't good for us. But when it's used to conflict with God's requirements, right, that's when it becomes a problem. And this is a God that knows us. He knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. And that should be an immense source of comfort for when we do fall down, brothers and sisters, and when we fail in a moral capacity, when we're drawn away of our own lust and enticed, and then we go that one step further because the world makes it so easy. And we looked at that other passage. Again, it's not the falling, and it's not the fact that we may keep falling, but it's the fact that we never make excuses, the fact that we keep getting up. And look, I am somebody who, there's people I know in my life who, whatever their principles are, they live it. And I respect them. They take people on face value. They are very deeply principled people. And they're very consistent. I'm somebody that I can talk myself in and out of all sorts of silly things, right? And so I'd struggle with consistency. My wife is a rock, and I'm like all over the place. She's the gravity, and I orbit. Okay? So, but we're all different, aren't we? But at the end of the day, one thing that I do with my own personal failings is very much what David says. He sinned with Bathsheba, right? He deserves the death penalty. And he says to God, he says, please restore me the joy of your salvation. Uphold me with a willing spirit. He goes, then I'll teach transgressors your ways and sinners will return to you. He says, I will use my experience with failure to try to go to other people who have failed and help them because you've shown me compassion and forgiveness. And so a long, long time ago, I made a deal with God, and it sounds a bit like Jacob, and it probably is. I said, look, I clearly struggle with passions and convictions and failure is something I'm up and down a lot as a person. I promise I'll never pretend I'm better than anybody else, and I promise I'll try to be honest within reason about my faults and failings. And it's a promise that I've by and large kept, and I think God's still working with me. So it's one of those things that we've all got to find our way to go forward. And sometimes we place so much focus on failing that we end up wallowing around in the things that we do that are shameful, that are wrong, that cause us to lose faith and hope. Whereas really the focus should be, get up, keep going. Right? The just man falls 7 times and God's mercies are renewed every morning. And Galatians 6 is another one. Brothers, if anyone is caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual, restore them in a spirit of gentleness, keeping an eye on yourself, lest you yourself be tempted. And Romans 12, the focus should be, don't be overcome of evil, but keep getting up. God's mercies are truly renewed every morning. You have a bad day, fine. Close out the day. The next day, you start again. God's mercies, God's hit the reset button. Tomorrow is another day. Now, another thing that comes up, and this is, again, a very important thing when we're parents, is admitting fault, confessing sin, and saying sorry. I remember talking to my boys about, obviously, trials and temptations common to men. And, we were driving along and one of my lads saw a girl walking down the path, and I was looking in the mirror and he's watching. I said, so you're looking at that girl? And Lecky goes, you look at girls. I'm like, yes, I do. but it's not a good thing. And I remember we were talking about, obviously things that would come into their minds and struggles and temptations and things that happen with young lads when they're growing up. And Lecky turned to me and he says, "Does that happen to you?" And everything in me just wanted to go, "No." And then I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Some of these things you don't grow out of." I said, "You are constantly going to be struggling with this because we're in a world where it floods you with this. You can't escape it. And every summer is a horrible time for a guy because it just gets more and more ridiculous and things get more and more spray on. And just when you think they cannot accentuate anything anymore, they go another level. And you think, how is this even possible? How do you get into that thing?" Right? It's just crazy. But then on the other hand, guys are getting signed to contracts which are underwritten by lawyers that says, "I can't even shake your hand unless you and your parents have all consented." And it just seems so stacked and ridiculous and designed to create so much mistrust. Right? But again, we have to be people that can admit our fault. Right? That can say sorry. Apologising is a definition of putting to death human nature. And wherever you see a contentious issue, be it in a marriage or the ecclesia, you will invariably find someone who will not back down, who cannot say sorry, who cannot basically back down. And so we will never grow to be a good parent or a spouse if we can't say sorry. It is as simple as that, brothers and sisters. And I don't find it easy. Well, I never used to. But one thing I can say to you is, the more you do it, the easier it gets. And now my advice to young married men before they get married is, well, first of all, you say, can he admit fault? Can he apologise? Does he take himself too seriously? If I get no's, well, run for the hills. Right? But say sorry first, ask questions later. And that's my one advice to unmarried young men. Just resolve it and then figure out what you did wrong later on. Right? I tell you what, it works. So what I'd like to do now is, now that we're over halfway through, is we're now going to look at the Apostle Paul very quickly, because we're moving into people like Jesus and Paul who never actually married and never actually had children, but they were parents, 100% in every sense of the word. And so there are people out there who don't get married, they are single. But at the end of the day, it's a bit like the Ethiopian eunuch where Isaiah, when Philip quotes from Isaiah, it says, "Don't think you're a dry tree. Don't think it's all over for you, because you can beget children in Christ. You can beget children for God." And the wonderful thing about our ecclesias is through Sunday school and youth group and things like that, you never stop parenting. And even when you grow up, like, who here at 50 and 40 hasn't needed a dad to come alongside and go, "Look, it's tough now, but you've got this. And you've got all these abilities, you can do it. Keep going." Like, we never get to the point where we don't need mum and dad, any mum and dad, right? We are people at heart. We have a child in all of us that just needs that. And Paul calls himself a mother, a father, and a brother. And so in Galatians, he said, "I'm in anguish of childbirth," right? He says, "We were gentle to you like a nursing mother, taking care of her own children." In Corinthians, he said, "I fed you with milk, but not solid food, because you weren't ready for it." But then he evokes the father. He goes, "You know how like a father with his little children, we exhorted and encouraged and charged you." That's what dads do. Mothers nurture, mothers love, mothers draw in, but fathers exhort. We encourage, and then we kick them out the house. Right? And when they fall over, you go, "Are you dead? No. Are you bleeding? No. Dust yourself off. What did you do wrong? Have another go." That's what dads do. That's what we should be doing. Right? So the mothers draw in, fathers build up, strengthen, and kick out. Sorry. Not quite that aggressively, but you know what I mean. And the other one, "I appeal to you to my child Omniscius, whose father I became in imprisonment." Right, so the runaway slave. And he's saying to the landowner, the person who owns this slave, he says, "Hey, I'm your father as well. I brought you in. He's my son as well, so could you please go easy on him, because I showed a lot of patience with you. And then the other one is Timothy, my one true child in the faith, my son in the faith, grace, mercy and peace. Titus, my child in the common faith. So Paul was a father. But what kind of father was he? Well, Paul was an incredible individual. He was one of these personalities that could really, in many ways, be all things to all men. And there's a passage in Corinthians where he says to them, we've spoken you freely, Corinthians, and he says all of his problems and his dramas and the challenges that he faces. Doesn't hide anything. And he says, our hearts are wide open. And then he turns around and says, could you please open your hearts as well? Paul led from the front. Whatever behaviours he wanted them to imitate, he did first. And so with our own children, whatever behaviours you want them to emulate, you've got to lead. You've got to be the one. If you want them to say sorry, you've got to be the first to say sorry. If you want them not to take themselves so seriously, you've got to emulate that. If you want them to serve others, well, you've got to show them that you too can serve others. And so that was Paul. When he was saying, be followers of me, he was somebody that was doing it. Now, at the same time, and this is something for me, when you're not doing the right thing, don't justify yourself, right? My childs are very good at saying, but you do that, but you this. And my standard line is, well, yes, but Christ is the head of this home. And I'm not always a consistent person. I'm never going to justify myself. And it sort of ends the discussion. But Paul was no pushover. He wasn't one of those marshmallow parents, just soft on the inside and soft on the outside, right? Paul was a formidable individual, right? And Paul really should have had an amazing sense of humour when you look at the type of personality he was, but he was a very intense person. And so the best we get of Paul's humour is this blistering sarcasm, right, where he says, I'm not inferior to these super apostles. And he gave them a nickname of super apostles, of people who walked around with a haughty air, who took favours from people, who elevated themselves above others and just put others down, the whole treat them mean, keep them keen kind of thing. Right, and he says, since you're so smart, Corinthians, you're going to put up with an idiot, a fool. You're so smart. You let people slap you around, take your money, while you even let you strut around and slap them in the face. That's how bright you are. We are too weak to behave in such a way. But hey, they're really good at bragging. So let me show you how I can brag about the things that they would never, ever brag about. Right? So Paul's this blistering sarcasm. And again, I don't think we should be sarcastic all the time, but how many times do children weight things in a particular way where there's a double motive? And they're trying to play the victim card so that you get sympathetic to them and you sort of let them have. And so sometimes a little bit of sarcasm isn't such a bad thing as, oh, really? Oh, are you hurt? Come to Daddy, I'll give you a hug. Come to Daddy, it's all right, I'll give you a hug. There, it's all good. And I'll go away, go away, go away. And you soon realise that, no, they were just playing the sympathy card because they had ulterior motives. And so there is sometimes a place for a little bit of sarcasm when you become a parent. But then there's the wrath of Paul. And Paul was a raw, unfiltered person. He had quite the temper, right? I think Paul was very much the mother lioness in certain ways. When he was evoked to wrath, my goodness, it was over. The one thing a father lion fears the most is a mother lion, because if a mother lion's coming at you, she wants to kill you. Men will have a dust up, pick themselves up and have a drink afterwards. But if you provoke a woman to violence, no, she wants to kill you. And that's why, you've got Shiva, the goddess of destruction and rebirth. You've got Ashtaroth, the god of love and war. So there's these extremes in women where they are the source of love. But my goodness, don't rev them up too much. Pro tip. My wife's got two no's. There's one no that says, yeah, all right, I'll think about it. We can discuss this. There's another no that says, I'm about to buy a ticket back to Lithuania. And we don't go there. We just back away. Okay, here we are. So he's got these letters where he says, you know what? He says, so arrogant as though, well, I'm not going to come to you. He says, but I will come soon if the Lord will, and I will find out the talk of these arrogant people. Not just the talk, but their power. So when I am facing you eyeball to eye, you will know how smart and how strong and how firm you are. I will deal with you, right? And then the system of kingdom of God does not consist in talk but power. What do you want? Because I'm going to come. Do you want me to come with a rod or with love in a spirit of gentleness? It's your choice. What do you want? And it says in Corinthians, I warn those who have sinned before and all the others. I warn them again while absent. If I come again, I will not spare you. Now, fathers, there is a time when you have to be a roaring lion. There is a time when we must employ shock and awe. Obviously, our children, when they get older, we can appeal to more principles, but when they're younger and they're very much dictated by a lot more animal instincts, and they act like seagulls and fight and squabble and argue. Sometimes the father lion has to roar, and sometimes you have to strike terror into their hearts. And you need to be that kind of person. They need to know that if they cross certain lines, things are going to get bad really, really quickly, right? And that is our job. We are the biggest, we are the strongest. You know, absent of a well-aimed rolling pin, we are the most powerful member of that family. So when your boys get to the point when they are as tall as their mum, that's when you've got to have another chat to them and say, right, once upon a time, your mum got her way because she was stronger. Now you're stronger. Once upon a time, she got her own way because she could overpower you. Now, well, you're taller than your mum. You're stronger than your mum. You know what? It's down to respect. And that's my wife. And if I see you doing that, there's going to be trouble. Are we clear? You know, I had to have that chat with my eldest because he was tall and he was looking down on his mum and getting all angry. And he goes, oh, I said to him, you get one thing to appeal, 2 appeals, make them count, don't demand. I said, but if she says no the 3rd time, I don't care if it's wrong, unfair, it doesn't matter. You take it to me, I'll deal with it, but that's it. End of story. He goes, what if I forget? And what if I get a bit carried away? I said, well, she was here first. Sorry. You know, so I think Lecky was listening in on this. Lecky's one of these people that avoids conflict. He reads the room. He plays his cards right. Sim's always been that like in your face. You know, but anyway, they all get to the point where they get a little easier. And the other one is my favourite. You know, where Paul's getting so revved up about the fact that all the work in the Galatian Ephesians has been undone. And he goes, I wish those who trouble you would add... And I won't read it all out, but my goodness, when Paul gets angry, you find his language gets quite brutal. Like Philippians, look out for dogs, look out for evildoers, look out for those who mutilate the flesh. Right? You just get a shiver that goes down your spine. Right? He was somebody that was not scared to basically bring his language down a little bit to make a point. When he says, I suffered all things but dung, rubbish, that I may gain in Christ, there's 2 words that make up the word dung. One is dog, and the other one is excrement. Now that is a very crude term. It is basically saying all the things that these Judaizers value, their genealogies and when and how they kept the law and all the rest, he said it's all rubbish, it's all nonsense. But by the same token, he was an incredibly vulnerable person, right? He says, I don't want you to be unaware of the affliction that we experience. He goes, with the 2 Corinthians, there's the first letter where he's quite blistering. And then he obviously makes all those threatening letters saying, I'm going to come and I'm going to deal with you. And he goes in, and we know that he really did get stuck into them. And then he goes away and he's tormented with doubt. Have I gone too far? Have I offended them? Have I actually disciplined them way too much? And of course, as a parent, that happens, doesn't it? Like, they rev you up so much that you go, guns blazing, you know, and then you realise that one person's just omitted a crucial detail. That's something my youngest was very good at. My eldest wasn't very articulate. Lecky was extremely articulate. He would just omit certain details. So I'd go and just go, rah! Right, and they said, but I didn't do it. You turn around and go, is this true? Oh, well, I might have just missed out that part, right? And so, but you've actually got to fix that. If you've gone in guns blazing and you've actually there's a travesty of justice and you've disciplined the wrong child because the other one set him up, you've got to correct that. And so Paul was like that. He would go away and reflect, did I do it right? Did I get the balance right? I think I've gone too far. And he says, I'm scared that if I come, I won't be what you want me to be, and I'm afraid that you won't be what I want you to be, and I'll find arguing and jealousy. I don't want that to happen again. And I'm scared that God's going to humble me before you, and I may have to cry over the loss of someone who's sinned before. A very different tone to the first letter. A lot more appealing, a lot more conciliatory, because obviously that was a whole work in progress. 4 letters were written to the Corinthian ecclesia to deal with all the challenges and conflicts that they faced. Right? And Paul was not scared to open up his heart and to say all the problems that he struggled with. He was someone that wasn't scared to be able to say, who is weak and I'm not weak? Who is offended and I don't burn? Now, the context of the word burning is in the context of moral temptation. So Paul was a single man. Paul was somebody that ran around talking to lots of different people. And so he was more than happy to say, all the things that you struggle with in your walk, I am the same. I'm not any better than you. I deal with the same challenges as any person does. And that is a very powerful thing, to be able to do it. So we need to be open about our limitations and our weaknesses. And yes, it's hard. Sometimes there are people who try to take advantage of us. Sometimes there's people that try to score points off of us. But at the end of the day, I think the value of it is far outweighs any opportunity that someone might have to score a point off you. People need to know that other people are going through the same problems. We're probably not as open as we should be. And I think the reason Paul was able to do that is because no one would dare score a point off him. I think the man had the ability to turn around and just go, right? So he could be honest and open in such a way that people would accept it and embrace it, but they wouldn't dare to his face try and score a point. And that's something that I've worked on in my life, is I think it's valuable to share, to try to be real, to not pretend. But you've got to have sharp teeth. You do have to have the ability to turn around and say to someone, well, you don't experience that? You're one of those extreme people that lives in a pure castle? That's not you? Okay, fair enough. Take some notes off you. We need to be able to deal with those sorts of things. We need to fight for the right sometimes to be honest and vulnerable. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And Paul was definitely that kind of brother. He was honest and vulnerable because he had the ability to stand his own ground. Paul out-honested people. I know that's not a word, but I have invented it because he truly, truly did, right? If you look at any arrogant person, there's areas of no-go zones. They will not go because there's a certain image, there's a persona, there's something they're projecting that's not actually who they are. Whereas Paul, he was right out there in the open and he would out-honest them. He would dare them to go where he himself would go. It was kind of like an honesty duel. I'll share this, and they cover up. I'll share this. You're bragging about this. I'll brag about my vulnerabilities. And nobody could out-leverage Paul's pride against him. No one at all. No one could play on his ego, and he would go where no proud man could ever follow. And the reason why he did that was because the cause was always greater. And when you think about it, that is a powerful weapon to have. The amount of discussions I've had where you're arguing with someone who can't admit fault, they're never wrong. And you argue the point, and it goes around and around in circles. Try this. Make sure you apologise. In any argument, you have to concede points. In any argument, you have to course correct. So apologise. Oh, sorry, I got that wrong. All right, I'll change my view. And you'll notice they never do it. And then at a certain point, you turn around and say, hey, it seems to me that there's 2 issues being argued here. It seems to me that you're never wrong, and that I have actually admitted fault on 2 occasions, and at no point have you corrected or owned or admitted. So I get the feeling that this conversation is pointless, because what's the point of arguing anything with someone who's never wrong? Because there's only really one truth in the room, and that's your pride. And you know what? That is a very powerful thing to use. And Paul, absolutely, that is how he operated. He was an honest man. He opened his heart wide. He was completely transparent because all of his enemies weren't. And that is a very, very effective weapon to basically rise above and make the cause greater. He would set the bar of honesty, humility, and vulnerability and dare his opponents to follow. He was a confident, competent servant with very, very sharp teeth. And so there is a power in humility, brothers and sisters. Humble parents will never have their pride leveraged against them. You can't have a humble parent and the children learn to use their mistakes and inconsistencies against them because they just admit it. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Humble parents can absolutely course correct. And I have this little cartoon. Note, children, there, the light bulb above our heads. See? We are wise. You know, I've seen you do that. Why can't I do the same? My inconsistencies do not give you license to do the same. Christ is the head of this family. But you said I could do it. There's another one where you make an initial decision and you think about it and think, no, that was the wrong decision. And they say, but you said. You say, well, it was a mistake. I've thought about it. I don't think it's the right way to go. I've changed my mind. I'm allowed to do that. You know, what can they say? But if you're proud, well, you're now in a quandary because you've got to admit fault. Right? So humble parents can course correct. They can adjust and listen to the needs of their children, right? So it's not fair, I didn't mean to do it. And here's my most oft-repeated line, because I've got a little temper. I meant to tell you off, but I think I went too far, and I apologise. You know, and I've got an extrovert little alpha male in my family. You know, Lecky's quite the big personality, and every now and then we'll have our clashes. But there was, you know, one time I was trying to teach a life lesson. I thought it was very profound. And he wasn't even listening. He was reading his book. And he turns around and he says something completely random. I said, well, you think you don't need this? You think you're too cool for school? You think you know all this stuff? Oh, I see. And he goes, were you talking to me? I said, you knew I was talking to you. He goes, no, I didn't. I was reading my book. I said, you knew? He goes, no, I didn't. I was reading my book. And Sam says, he was reading his book. And I drove home and I'm like, you know, it's the peace of God as an umpire in your heart. You know you've overstepped the mark. And it's just like, yeah, right, I might have got that wrong. I apologise. You know, but, you know, at the same time, if we're parents that do things for our children as sacrifice, and then your children turn around, like I had just 3 weeks ago, where it says, I'm busy, I'm doing something. And you're like, I did this for you, I did that for you, I did that for you. We drove here, we picked you up, we did this. And I've asked you one thing, and this is what I get. And so then you get, oh, sorry for being selfish. Yeah. But that's the thing, when you have those as an expectation of service and sacrifice, my goodness, you can leverage it against them. And there's nothing they can say. Absolutely, it's high moral ground. High moral ground is a very, very powerful leverage tool. Right? And once you get into the habit of using this positivity as a leverage, suddenly everyone's aspiring a little bit higher rather than the lowest common denominator. You don't get it, no one understands me. Maybe I don't. You're different from me, I'm sorry, let's talk about it. And with my younger son, there's many occasions where I'm like, I don't know what to say. I'm worried about this. Can you see why I'm worried? Yes. Well, all right, clearly I'm not saying it in the right way, but I just want you to know that I'm not trying to just headbutt you for the sake of it. And it's sitting down with the kid that doesn't make sense and just saying, I don't get you. I just don't, because you're different from me. But it's not like I don't care. I do care. And I'm worried. Can you see why I'm worried? You know, so that's what I want, all right? So I haven't been saying it right clearly. Lots of arguments between us, but that's what I want. And if you say that to a child and you just go, well, sorry, I'm not a superhuman person. I remember saying to my children, I said, you know, a lot of dads are out there, they build things. You know, we had a chook run that had 400 nails in it and it was crooked and it wouldn't sit straight. I said, a lot of dads go camping and kick footballs. I said, I'm not that father. I'm not very good at any of these things, but I said, I'll know your hearts and minds and I can help you with those areas. I'm a very big believer in lowering expectations, right? Don't pretend you're a hero. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to be dad and you have to love them. But just be you. And they'll accept that. They'll be fine with that. Because it's treating them with a degree of respect. Now, I won't go through that. There's one last thing I want to talk about before... Oh, by the way, this is important. Paul did respect, honour and praise women. Right? He was taught and assisted by women. And that is a very important point. Right? Paul was somebody who, wherever possible, he would talk about the people that he valued in life and what they meant to him. And he respected and praised the women in his life. Priscilla and Aquila, they worked together. Priscilla converted Apollos. Her name is mentioned first. She was the one that took him aside and taught him. And Apollos was taught. He wasn't an arrogant man. Right? So our job as men and fathers is to elevate our wives, to honour them. And if you do that, your sons will naturally figure out that I don't want to be the odd one out that doesn't do that. Our wives should be queens in the house. They should be the empresses, within reason. And but that's what we should be doing, and we lead in that regard. So Paul did commend and praise women, and not only that, Paul praised profusely. All through his epistles, he singles people out and he praises them. And this is another one. If you are the primary source of praise and affirmation of your child, if your child goes to bed at least once or twice a week, where you go through all the things that they're good at and all the things you're proud of and all the things that make them special, and they're basking in their parents' praise, you take that away. And they will feel it. They will know. If you disappoint them, and they will know that, oh, the praise tap just got turned off, right? But if you're a Satan parent and you're constantly no, at the end of the day, they get used to it. It just goes straight over their head. It ceases to become meaningful because you're not being positive and you're reinforcing. All you're doing is opposing and undermining. And so we do have to respect our children. I remember Lecky, he's always been a risk taker. He's always done crazy, death-defying stunts. I don't understand it. I used to come down really hard at him at 6. And at 6 years old, he said to me, "How old do you have to be to leave home?" And he's sitting there and I said, 18. He goes, "Can't wait till I'm 18. And I said to him, "Oh, he hates me. He wouldn't touch me. He actually avoided me." So I sit him down and I go, "Right, you like to take risks." I said, I don't understand it. I don't get it, but clearly it's important to you. Here's the deal. You can take a risk. You just got to show me you've thought about the consequences if something goes wrong. That's all. Shake. I shook hands with a 6-year-old. It was the most humiliating thing I'd ever done. You know what, we were in Korea, we had all day, so I was like, let's just give it a try. And that's the thing. Experiment with the concept of parenting. Try different things. Don't keep headbutting the same thing over and over again. Don't be a Satan parent. Yeah, it worked. He'd be up a tree and I'm like, oh, that is, don't worry, Dad. If I fall, that branch will break me, that branch will break me. I'll probably just break a leg. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then there was a Korean person there with me and she goes, "You are happy if he breaks his leg?" I'm like, "No." I said, "But it's really, really important for him to do this stuff." So I said, well, we're just going to have to take it as a lesser of two evils. Right? But we have to show respect to our children. And it worked. Like, it was incredible. It was a huge education for me that we don't just use authority. Respect your children, reason with them, value what's important to them, and suddenly it can be an incredible thing. Now, I don't think, we don't have time, do we? We've got to stop, don't we? Are we done? Where's my chairman? Yeah, we're done? That's it? All right. I was going to talk about 10,000 instructors and not many fathers, but we've well and truly run out of time. So thank you very much for your attention. See you.